Well, hello. It's Easter, and I know the church put up an Easter program for you on YouTube and on our Facebook page of a service that we recorded recently. But I just wanted to add a little something here. I guess I could call Easter 2.0. And if I want to hold up this picture and ask you, what do you see in this picture? Now, if you've never seen this picture before, there are actually two women in this picture. Do you see them? Okay, most people usually see one or the other. Um, Let me see if I can point it out for you, if I can position it just right. Right here is the profile of a young woman. Okay, now if you look at it this way, and you'll see the profile of an old lady. There's her eyes, there's her mouth. And when you're looking at the young woman, it looks like the young woman's looking away. The old lady's looking down. And when it's the old lady, that's her mouth. When it's the young woman, that's some type of necklace. And that's the old lady's hair. And then that's the young lady's hair from the back. So do you see the two ladies in the picture now? Okay, probably you do. Now here's what happened. I just changed your perception of things. Because you saw something in that picture, from this point on, every time you see that picture, you'll see the two ladies. If you saw them just then, you'll see them from now on. And that's because you've had that perception has given you an awareness of something. The awareness that there's two ladies in that picture, and you'll be able to clearly see them. Now, here's the thing about it. Once we've been given awareness of something, or have a revelation, if you will, of something like that, you can't go back to where you were. You cannot back up and say, well, I see the two ladies today, but I think from now on I'll just see the one lady. It doesn't work, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And see, as we're coming up on Easter, I've told the church before my story of Easter. Growing up, I hated Easter. I hated Easter because that was the one Sunday out of the year my mother made me dress up. And I used to have to wear those little shorts, a coat, a bow tie, and shoes that hurt my feet. And it was always hot. Yeah, always hot. It didn't matter if it snowed the day before. Easter was always hot, or at least it was my memory. And since we lived in New Orleans at the time, it probably was, because it stayed hot there most of the time. So everything I associated with Easter was negative. There was that. We had to stay at church longer that day. I didn't like that. No presents. I didn't like that. I did like the Easter basket. There was usually a piece or two of good candy in it. But there was just so much about Easter in comparison to Christmas. Oh, I love Christmas. Christmas was good. It was cool. Everybody got presents. Everybody felt good and loved each other. I really didn't sense that around Easter. In fact, Easter to me was a very somber time, and there wasn't much joy associated with it at all. And I know every year at Easter, you have some people who make that one of the 2 or 3 Sundays a year that they make sure to go to church. Now, this year, it's going to be different because nobody's meeting that I know of. And so, if you attend a service, it'll be online. Well, that's great. I hope everyone does. I hope everyone finds a service that ministers to them, and if they don't know the Lord, they'll know the Lord when it's over. But here's the point, and this is the point really that you find throughout the Gospels, but especially in the Gospel of John, that when people saw Jesus, they couldn't unsee him. When they saw who he was, they couldn't not see who he was. And one of the questions, if you remember, that he asked asked Peter, is Peter, who do people say that I am? And Peter gave a couple of answers, and then he said, well, Peter, who do you say I am? And Peter gave the right response. You're the Christ, Son of the living God. And he said, flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but the Spirit revealed this to you. And see, it's important when we're answering that question, who is Jesus, that the Spirit gives us the answer, because it's the Spirit who gives the revelation. Paul wrote that to those who are perishing, the gospel is foolishness. And we need to keep that in mind. And I say that because we live in a time when a lot of people are being very bold in their opposition to the gospel, to Christ, and everything Christian. And and sometimes Christians get angry about it and everything else. Listen, lost folks act like lost folks. We don't need to get angry at lost folks for acting like who they are. We certainly want Christians to act like who they are if they're acting like Christians. So the key here is being able to answer a question, who is Jesus, depends on revelation, the revelation of who God is. So I want to encourage you this year. I know many of us are praying for people who don't know the Lord, who need to know the Lord, or who need to come back from the Lord, or come back to the Lord. Maybe they're away in sin right now, in rebellion against God. Can I encourage you with this? Pray that they'll have a revelation of who Jesus is. You see, when Jesus was on the cross, the only people who saw who he was the women who followed them around, and John. And John didn't understand it all. In fact, we're told in the book of John that none of this made sense to John until after the resurrection. And then after the resurrection, the pieces of the puzzle started coming together, and he as well as other disciples could make sense out of what was happening. So I want to encourage you this year at Easter to remember and that when you're praying for people to come to Christ, we need to pray that they'll have a revelation of who Jesus is. When people are praying for revival in this country, which is fine to do, can I tell you, most folks don't have a clue what that means. When I hear Christians talk about, well, we need revival. If they've ever been to church very much, they think about that meeting they had in the summertime that usually lasted a week. Using that kind of jargon for somebody who's not familiar with spiritual things or churchy things makes no sense. So what we really need to be praying for is that people, the eyes of their understanding will be open so that they can see who Jesus is. Because if they ever see who he is in the picture, they can never unsee it. If they ever see who he is in the gospel, they can never unsee him. Now they can pretend they haven't seen him. And you can pretend you haven't seen the two ladies in the picture. But doesn't that isn't an honest statement. You're only deceiving yourself and maybe deceiving someone else. Because what happens once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. So this Easter, I just pray that Jesus will become clearer and clearer to all of us, and that we will pray that he will become clear to those who need him. Because as he said in this passage in John chapter 6, verse 41 says, At this the Jews there began to grumble about him, because he said, I am the bread who came down from heaven. They said, Is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph? In other words, they said, We know your daddy. What are you talking about? Verse 43, Jesus said, Stop grumbling among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them, and I will raise them up in the last day. No one can come to Jesus, really come to Jesus, unless they see him first. They have to see the state of their life, which is they're fallen in sin, and they have to see provision of salvation that's only made possible through faith in Jesus Christ alone. And once they see it, they can't unsee it. So pray for your friends and neighbors this week and loved ones who need Christ. They don't need to see religion. They don't need to You don't need to pray that they'll come around to agreeing with you on Bible verses and Bible doctrine. Pray that they'll have a revelation of Jesus Christ. Because once they see him, they can't unsee him. Have a great day.